Hi Quilty friends, welcome to Block of the Month 2022. We're so excited that you're joining us in this journey and we think that you will really enjoy it. The colors are so bright and cheerful and the blocks are a little bit bigger than some of the Block of the Months from last year. So we think that you will have a really great experience. There won't be a video every month, but there will be a video in the months that we are going to tuckerize the block. This month, it's a large block, so we're going to tuckerize it, and we have this large tucker trimmer, which is not the one that you've purchased. You've purchased the smaller one. We do have these available in the shop, but they're rather expensive, and this is the only month that you will use this size. So you're welcome to come in and use it this month to square up your blocks, or you're welcome to square up your blocks if you have a 12.5-inch square at home, whatever you decide. Okay, so what you're going to make are some very large combination units. They start with half square triangles. So we're going to use a slightly modified version of how Tucker makes these, but we're definitely going to use the ruler to square them up at the end. Okay, so what you have in your packet is all pre-cut for you this month. You have 8 white squares, and they measure 13.5 inches, because with the Tucker method, remember that everything is oversized so that at the end you can trim it down to the exact size that you want your block to be, which in this case, we're going to be trimming our block to 12.5 inches. Okay, you should have 8 different colored squares. I've just chosen pink to use to demonstrate today, but you will have 8 different colored squares, and you'll see all the colors here. And I want to point out to you that this one is pink, and this one is red, and this one is orange. So you might want to note that on your directions. Pink, red, and orange. Okay, and then the last thing you have is 4 black squares. Okay? So what we're going to do first is we're going to create a very large half square triangle. And we're going to do that by making a diagonal line. And usually I would tell you just to use your magic wand, but this square is so big that we are going to use the magic wand, but you have to start by putting a diagonal line corner to corner. Okay, because we need something to guide the poor magic wand because this is so big. We'll be using the magic wand again with the smaller squares, and we won't need to draw this line. Okay, that didn't go so well. I just checked to make sure this pen worked, and now it doesn't seem to want to work. Maybe it didn't want to work this much, huh? Okay, that's good enough. I can see it. Okay, now I'm going to use my magic wand and put the center line of the magic wand along that line that I just drew. And then draw on both sides of it. I was hoping maybe the ink got flowing a little better here. If you don't have a magic wand, what you would do is draw that diagonal line and then use your ruler to draw a line 1/4 inch on either side. So if you don't have a magic wand, you can still do this. If you decide in the upcoming months that you want one, we do have them in the shop. They're easy to use. It kind of eliminates a step usually, because you don't usually have to do that middle line. But here, I pretty much had to do the middle line because the poor little magic wand wasn't long enough. Okay, so what you're going to do is you're going to take one of your colored squares and you're going to line this up. Right sides together, although the white fabric does not have a right or wrong side, but the pink fabric does. The colors do. So does the black. but the white fabric does not, so you don't have to worry about it. And because this seam is so long, I'm going to put a few pins in here to hold this till I get it onto the sewing machine. And I'm going to use, I would use a light to medium gray thread because you're sewing on both white, black, and then colors. So a medium to light gray is probably the best color to choose. Okay, so now I'm going to sew down both of these outside lines, not on the center line. The center line is actually okay, you probably, I don't know what foot you have for your machine. I'm going to use this foot because the little red triangle is lined up with the needle. So that's the foot that I've chosen to use. So you'll have to think about that because you're actually going to sew on the line. And then I'm going to change my stitch length to 1.8. Okay, stitch length should be small, 1.8. Okay, and I'm gonna sew right on the lines that I just drew. Okay, and you want to sew straight, you want to sew right on the line. That'll make everything a lot easier later. So I'm being careful. Get rid of that pin. That I'm staying right on the line that I drew. And as you can see, this is a pretty long distance down this line. Okay, when you match up your squares, if they don't exactly match up, because they're pretty big squares, you're more interested, you're not worried about these corners as much as you are the 2 points, the 2 corners that you're sewing between. Okay, and as you could see at the bottom edge, mine was a little, it didn't quite come together, but my points are in line, and that's what you're going for. Thread is caught. There. Okay, now once I'm done sewing both these lines, and don't bother to back stitch at the beginning and end because you're just going to sew over those edges in a minute. What I'm going to do is I'm going to cut on that middle line, point to point, and then I will have 2 half square triangles. And we only need 1 of them for this month. So I'm going to tell you, it says in your directions what you're going to do with the others, because you're going to use those, you're going to recut them for some additional months, actually for month 3. Okay, so these 2 lines are sewn. I'm going to cut down the middle line. If you didn't have that line there, if you just used the magic wand to do the 2 outside lines, all you would do is cut from point to point.
You don't ever cut using the magic wand. It's too skinny and you'll cut your fingers.
That, and it's not designed for that. It's not as hard a plastic as this, and your rotary cutter will just chew it up. Okay, so now what I actually have are 2 half square triangles. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to press this seam. So I'm going to get rid of this. And remember, you only need 1 of them. So let's take a look at which one we're going to use. What we're going to do is we're going to open this seam, and then we're going to cut this one in half. And the other one you're going to use, this one you're going to use for month 3. We're going to recut it. And if you look at your directions, the asterisks at the end tell you what you're going to cut those into. Because you're going to cut squares out of what's left there. Okay, I'm going to press this on this other side as well. Okay, now I'm going to take and I'm going to cut this way from point to point. Anymore. Okay, now this is the pink one. So I need this half because pink is on the left and white is on the right. See, this one would be incorrect. So this is the one I want. Okay, you got it?
Yeah, we got to turn it.
Okay, we got to turn it this way for you to see. Okay, see? It matches this. This is the pink, this is the red, this is the orange. So the pink one is like this. So I want it the pink here, the white here, just like the picture. This one I'm going to put away, and don't throw it away because this can go in your oops bag. So in subsequent months, if you make a mistake cutting, this piece might be big enough in pink or white to save you. Okay, so put that away. Okay, remember this one, you're going to actually cut squares out of here and here, and their directions show you what to do. Okay, all right, now we're going to take, you have 4 of these, and we're going to take and cut these on the diagonal as well. So cut all 4 black on the diagonal. Okay, and you'll use all 4 of these. What I want you to do is take and you're going to sew these together so you end up with this configuration, just like this. Okay, now, what I suggest you do is the black is going to be just a little bit bigger because it doesn't have this seam. So take the black, fold it in half, and find the middle. And I'm going to press my middle in a little bit so I can really see it. And then I'm going to put that middle to this seam. And I'm going to pin it. Only I want to pin on this side because I'm going to sew with this side up so that I for sure keep this seam open. Okay. And then make it all lay nice and flat, raw edges right together. Okay, now, what you have to be aware of is you have all these seams are bias seams, which means they're cut on the bias and they stretch. So you want to handle this very carefully, and you don't want to overhandle it or you will stretch them. So when I go to sew it, I don't want to stretch it either. I just want it to lay flat on my sewing machine, and I'm going to sew this with a 1/4-inch seam. All right, let's talk for a minute about the 1/4-inch seam. What I'm going to do is put my 1/4-inch foot back on. And on this machine, I have to tell the machine that I'm going to use that I want a 1/4-inch seam with this foot. So I'm going to put the code in for that, and the needle moved over. But what I really want is a scant 1/4-inch. I don't want this to be a big, fat, generous one, and that's going to become even more important in the months to come as you are putting lots and lots of smaller pieces together. All those little bits of extra seam allowance will make your squares not be 12.5 inches, which is what we're going for. So I'm going to tell the needle that I want it to move over even a little bit more to make this a scant 1/4 inch. So I'm going to take the stitch width up to 8.8, and all that happened is my needle moved over to the right. So now between the edge of the foot and here, it's a little tiny bit less than a 1/4 of an inch.
You're on 8.7.
Oh,
Tell 'em
I want
the video.
8.8. What?
The video.
Okay, yes. If you look at the first email you got reminding you that you could pick up your packet, there is a link to a video by a lady named Marty Michelle. And she tells you how to check to be sure that your blocks are going to turn out the size that you want them. She uses little block strips that you cut and then you sew them together, and she tells you how to tell whether or not it's correct. So that should help you to figure out how to set your machine up, whether it means moving your needle, whether it means a different foot, whether it means you have to guide the edge of your fabric at a different spot. That's something you will have to figure out on your own home sewing machine. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm now going to sew these two together along this bias seam. And I don't want to stretch this, so I don't want this dragging. And in this case, since I have a 1/4 inch foot, I'm focusing my attention here, that the edge of the fabric is right along the edge of that foot, and I'm making sure that my raw edges are right together. Okay, and remember, you want to handle this gently because you don't want this to stretch. Okay, and here I want to be sure that my seam stays open. Okay, and don't lose control at the end. Okay, don't let the raw edges come apart just because you're at the end, and don't let it come away from the edge of your foot just because you're at the end. All right, my seam is sewn. I'm going to press this open, and the Tucker rulers are not non-slip, although we do sell Invisigrip in the shop. So if you want to make your Tucker ruler a little less slippery, you could apply Invisigrip, or some of you may already have some of those little dots at home that you can put on them. What I like about the Invisigrip is it covers the entire surface of the ruler. Okay, where the dots are only in certain spots. Okay, but the flatter this piece is to use the ruler, the easier it is to use the ruler. Okay, again, I'm pressing, but I don't want to stretch this. Okay, there's my block. Let me see if I can do a puzzle and make it look like this one. Okay, black up here, pink and white. Okay, so now we're ready to trim it down to 12 and a half. Okay, and we're going to use the Tucker ruler. Okay, the Tucker ruler has two sides to it. As you can see, it has a full black dot here. These are whole numbers. Okay, it has a half of a black dot here. These are half numbers. And since we want to trim this to 12 and a half, that's where we're going to start. Okay, can you come over my shoulder maybe, Meg? Okay, so what I'm going to do, in the class that we offered to introduce the Tucker system, it was called Exploding Heart. And in the Exploding Heart, we decided that this line should be called the equator. So we're going to call it the equator. Okay, that line is going to go along this seam, and the 12 and a half line is going to go along this seam. So the 12 and a half there, and the equator there. Now, I've got it basically like I want it. Now I'm going to adjust a little bit, because if I play, I can usually get the lines to be exactly on my seam lines. Okay, now, if you can't get the whole entire line on there, it's more important that it be lined up in the corners than it is that it be lined up in the exact center. Because what happens is when it's lined up exactly in the corners, then when I go to sew this to another block at 1/4 inch, I get beautiful points.
So the dots are on your seam lines
What dots?
in the corners. Here you've got the dot.
Well, that dot is only on that. There's no dots on these. That dot indicates this is the 1/2 inch side.
Okay.
Okay? So see the black?
Okay.
See the black line? That's exactly on my seam line. The black line, see it's a dotted line here, is exactly on my seam line.
So you want the lines in
So,
the corners.
yes.
That's more important than your middle.
Then the middle. If you can get all, the middle and all of it, that's wonderful. But if you can't, then pay attention to the corners, because right now I'm going to trim this side and this side, and as you can see, I'm trimming into the corners. And that's what I want. All right, this is a large ruler. So I'm going to move my hand slightly as I cut, because I want this to stay exactly in place. And as you see, I don't have a whole lot to trim, even though we cut these a full inch larger than what it's going to finish. Remember, they started 13.5 inches, and this block is finishing 12.5. There's not as much to cut as you would think. Okay?
So be careful.
Yes, so be careful. And again, we have this ruler in the shop. You are welcome to come in and take a turn and use it. Right. All right, now across the top. This is always the hard part for me. This is a bad angle for me. It's allergy season, can
Yeah.
you tell, Megan? Okay. All right, I've cut these two sides. Now I need to trim these two sides. So I'm going to take this, and I'm going to take this point and move it down here. So it's opposite side of where it was. Let me get Megan to trim. Thank you. All right, now, she must really need it. She's drinking cold coffee.
Yeah.
Now what we're going to do is the equator, but the dot is up here, but here's the line, is still going to go on this line, and the 12.5 is going to go on this line. Whoop, I'm not on the 12.5. There we go. Okay, really, that whole thing about measure twice, cut once, it's really important here. Like, there's a lot to check. You want to check that you're for sure on the 12.5 line, that this line is lined up. Now, see, here's what I'm telling you, that this is a little off in the middle, but it's on in my corner. The other thing is, this corner doesn't have a seam. It's a full piece. So I don't need to worry so much about this line going right into that corner. Wherever I cut it, that's going to become the corner. What I'm really interested in is that here and here it goes into the corner, and I'm on 12.5 and 12.5 because I'm cutting this square down. Notice that there's a little more to cut this time than there was the first time. I don't know why, but that's true almost every single time. You barely cut any on the first cut, and you cut more on the second cut. So I'm got this lined up here, this here, and this here. I'm not that worried about this, okay? If there were a seam line here, I would be worried about it, but there isn't. That's a whole piece of fabric. So wherever I cut it, that becomes the corner. So now I trim, again, this side and the top. Okay, so now I have this beautiful, perfect 12.5 inch square, and look, these go exactly into the corners. So now when I sew a 1/4 inch seam, that moves the corner perfectly down 1/4 of an inch. And if I put another block just like this over here, I'm gonna have perfectly matched up seams. Okay, that's what you're gonna do. You're gonna do this 7 more times. You have 8 different colors. And remember, it's very important to pay attention to the orientation of these. So which one you sew the black to, it's important. Okay, do not throw away your scraps. The subsequent blocks are much smaller, so these scraps, this one you're gonna use, but these scraps that you have left are gonna be used in those other months, either as part of your oops kit, or if you look at your directions, how to cut this. Okay, the other thing that I need to tell you is if you get all 8 blocks done, and if you get them and you come in and trim them here, you get to put your name in the prize jar. There's always at least one person that wins free long arming at the end of the 8 months, and usually there's some other long arming discounts, so it's worth you coming in and showing us your blocks. So every month that you finish all your blocks, bring them in for us to see, and you can put your name in the jar. Okay? There will not be a video next month, but there will be a video in month 3. Goodbye and good luck. What do you think?